Now, when it comes to the new version of D&D, the Paladin and the Druid were the most controversial of the playtest classes. And we're going to get into both of those in this video, as well as the Cleric, as we look at the Priest classes for new D&D. So to be clear, this is not insider information. This is all publicly available material from the playtest documents and the Jeremy Crawford interviews. I've just pieced it all together into digestible content for you. It's also important to note that this is not a comprehensive list of everything that's in the playtest. This is me hitting the highlights and giving you the TLDR version of the new edition of D&D. And because this is all based on playtest material, of course it's subject to change. However, we are at the point in the playtest where they've said we are not getting any more playtest documents for the player's handbook. So this is everything we know until the new book comes out. Now, before we dive into the first of our priest classes, the Cleric, let me go over a few things about magic and healing spells. During the playtest, they experimented with doing away with class-specific spell lists, and they replaced them with 3 straightforward spell lists. An arcane list for wizards, sorcerers, and warlocks, a divine list for clerics and paladins, and a primal list for rangers and druids. So you may have heard of that already, but that did not survive the playtest. People felt like it robbed the wizard of its versatility by giving all the same spells to both warlock and sorcerer, and it appeared to just make rangers and paladins too powerful, especially with the idea of giving rangers and paladins cantrips. Another significant change is that healing spells have been boosted. Cure Wounds now cures 2d8 and upcasts for 2d8 more. Healing Word now cures 2d4 and upcasts for an additional 2d4. Mass Healing Word also does 2d4 and upcasts at 1d4, so that's a little bit of an improvement. Mass Cure Wounds goes from 3d8 up to 5d8, and its upcast value is 1d8 per level. Of all of these, Cure Wounds definitely got the most significant boost and looks to be the go-to spell for upcasting of healing. Which makes sense because Cure Wounds is such an iconic spell. It falls into the same category as Magic Missile, Lightning Bolt, and Fireball as the most memorable spells across all editions. And there were 3 other spells we saw improvement on, but these came from earlier in the playtest, so I don't know how much these are going to stick. But they are Prayer of Healing now conveys the benefits of a short rest. Power Word Heal no longer has a somatic component, which, completely makes sense. And Aid now only provides temporary hit points. So Aid is no longer a spell you can use to bring people back from 0, which makes that newly improved Mass Healing Word look even more useful. And I'll quickly point out we've seen no changes to Goodberry, Aura, Vitality, Heal, or Mass Heal. And that's probably because these spells were good enough the way they were. Unless you're one of the folks that hates Goodberry because it gives nourishment and not just healing. But that's a topic for another day. But now it's time to get into our classes. Let's take a look at our Cleric. And one of the most important things to note about Clerics is that the subclasses have all been moved to 3rd level because all classes now have subclasses that start at 3rd level. And this leads us to a new ability called Divine Order that you choose at 1st level. The 2014 subclasses often fell into 2 different categories. The subclasses that gave you proficiency in martial weapons and heavy armor, and the subclasses that didn't. And the ones that didn't often gave you cantrips or extra skills. That subclass design has been replaced with the new 1st level feature, Divine Order, where you choose either Protector or Thaumaturge abilities. Protector gives you the martial weapon proficiency and the heavy weapon proficiency, where Thaumaturge gives you an additional cantrip and a bonus to your intelligent religion checks. This is a nice feature to get at 1st level because you're now waiting for that subclass to kick in at 3rd level. It's also a nice player choice because you get to choose how you want to play your cleric. Do you want them to be a spellcaster cleric or a melee cleric? And it's not completely dependent on the subclass that you choose. So now you get a number of uses listed on the Cleric class table, which is based on your Cleric level. So you get more of them up front, but you only get 1 back on a short rest. This change, plus not getting your subclass until 3rd level, does away with the 1 or 2 level dip that we used to see in optimization builds. Now when you take Channel Divinity, you get 2 options, which are really 3 options, because of course you get Turn Undead with Channel Divinity, but you also get the new ability called Divine Spark, which allows you to either heal a target or do damage to a target. At 5th level, clerics now get Smite Undead, which replaces the old Destroy Undead feature. Previously, this was based on challenge rating, but the new Smite Undead adds damage to your turn undead ability. So instead of obliterating the creature if it's below a certain challenge rating, now your turn undead actually deals additional damage, which I think makes this ability a little more exciting because you're rolling dice. Because when you roll really high, you'll still obliterate the creature, but it'll feel a little more earned. And when you roll low, it'll take a chunk out of all these creatures, and then that allows the rest of the party to gang up on them and finish them off with 1 or 2 hits, which I think increases the feel good for the whole group. At 7th level, you get Blessed Strikes, which allows you to choose the Divine Strike option or Potent Spellcasting option. Divine Strike adds magic damage to your weapon attacks, and Potent Spellcasting adds your Wisdom modifier to cantrip damage. These features line up really nicely with that first level feature called Divine Order, where you chose between Protector and Thaumaturge. Now at 10th level, you get Divine Intervention, which has been dramatically improved because it now allows you to use a 5th level spell without expending a spell slot or using any material components. This might actually be a little too powerful and might need to be toned down just a bit. Because certain spells have a longer casting time for a reason, and I don't think you should be able to use this ability to cast spells with a longer casting time as an action. And hopefully this is a feature that'll get tweaked slightly before we see it in the final version. Now, at 14th level, you get improved Blessed Strikes, so if you already have the Divine Strike ability, it just increases the damage by another d8. But if you've taken this Potent Spellcasting ability, it allows you to grant temporary hit points whenever you hit a target with a cantrip, which is a cool ability, but it opens up potential non-combat abuse, and I don't know how priestly it is to just randomly shoot villagers or animals to give yourself some temporary hit points. So at 20th level, you get Greater Divine Intervention, which allows you to use the Wish spell. But it does place the limitation that you can't use it in this way again until you finish 2d4 long rests. But this could vary greatly depending on the campaign style of play. What if your DM wants to fast forward the story by 2 months? During that time, your cleric can make over a dozen wishes. But it's a 20th level feature. You tell me what you think. Is that crazy? Is that over the top? I think so. But other than those last couple abilities, I think the cleric is very solid. So let's take a look at our subclasses, and all 4 of these subclasses are upgrades from the 2014 version. And honestly, if you liked playing the 5th edition version of these, you're gonna like the new version. They're all very well done. The one that stands out the most though is the Trickery domain, because it got a serious upgrade. If you remember, it had the Invoke Duplicity that allowed you to make an illusion of yourself. Well, now you can trade places with that illusion and teleport 30 feet. You can use that illusion to cast spells from. You can use it to distract opponents in a similar way to using the help action. It's just a really fun ability, and I think you're going to love playing this new Trickery domain cleric. And now it's time to talk about the Druid. And like I said in the beginning, the Druid was one of the more controversial parts of the playtest because it was clear that Wild Shape needed to be fixed, and they haven't quite fixed it yet. And we'll get into more of that later, but before, let's go over everything else about the Druid, and we'll come back and talk about Wild Shape. The first thing to notice, the Druid no longer has a curated list of weapon proficiencies. They're only proficient in simple weapons and light armor. That's just a simple way to streamline things because like the Cleric that gets Divine Order, the Druid gets Primal Order at first level, which gives you the choice between Warden and Magician. And this is very similar to the Cleric's Divine Order feature. If you choose Warden, you gain proficiency in martial weapons and medium armor. If you choose Magician, you get 1 extra cantrip and a bonus to nature check. And this starts a path of choices where you can choose a more martial theme for your Druid or a more spellcastery theme for your Druid. Next, we have the Wild Companion feature that lets you expend the use of your Wild Shape to cast Find Familiar. This was an optional rule from Tasha's, but this also sets up a trend for the Druid because now Druids can spend their Wild Shape to do other things than turn into animals. So this allows you to lean into that nature wizard theme of the Druid and reserves the Wild Shaper for the Moon Druid. Along those lines, the Wild Resurgent feature allows you to swap a spell slot for Wild Shape or a Wild Shape for a first level spell slot. This would help explain why Doric in the D&D movie never cast any spells. She was using all of her spell slots for more Wild Shaping. At 7th level, you get Elemental Fury, which puts you further down one of those 2 paths of the Nature Magician or Melee Beast. With Potent Spellcasting, you add your Wisdom modifier to cantrip damage, and Primal Strike allows you an extra d8 of magic damage to your melee attacks. So this is going to be really good for the Moon Druid to turn into a beast and then attack, dealing magic damage with their claws or their bite. And this ability improves at 15th level as potent spellcasting dramatically improves your cantrip range, and your primal strike damage increases by another d8. And then the feature you get at 18th level is called Beast Spells, which allows you to cast spells in your beast form. The wording on this needs a little bit of work because the way it's worded right now, you can cast spells with a material component as long as those material components aren't consumed or have a monetary value. However, that means you can cast spells with a material component, but it doesn't say you don't need that material component. So imagine a cave bear holding a druidic focus in its mouth, or a giant eagle holding material components in its claws. So like I said, they need to clean up the wording on that one. At 20th level, you get the Archdruid feature, which gives you one of 3 choices. Evergreen Wild Shape, which gives you extra wild shape whenever you roll initiative. Nature Magician, which allows you to convert your wild shapes into higher level spell slots. Or Longevity, which means you just age much slower. I don't think anybody's going to pick that one. Now let's look at the subclasses and hit the highlights. You have Circle of the Land, Circle of the Sea, Circle of the Stars, Circle of the Moon. I think these 4 do a really good job representing the druidic themes. Circle of the Moon we're going to come back to in just a minute. Circle of the Stars is just straight out of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Circle of the Land gets spell-like abilities and a lot of spell slots. Circle of the Land is definitely going to give the wizard a run for its money as the best caster in the game. And Circle of the Sea has a cool Wrath feature that surrounds you in thunder damage and pushes targets away. It does not use an action and lasts for 10 minutes. This one stands out as one of the most powerful features of any of the subclasses. So now let's talk about the Moon Druid and Wild Shape. Ultimately, the original problem with the Moon Druid is that it was super powerful at lower levels and then didn't hold up at higher levels, largely because of the use of monster stat blocks. When you would Wild Shape, you'd turn into a bear and you'd use the bear stat block. So we all knew that needed to change. And the major change is to allow Wild Shape to give you temporary hit points instead of all the hit points of an entire stat block. And for all the other druid classes that works, but the Moon Druid needs a little more tuning. So they originally tried to use templates, and I thought that was a good idea. Give the Moon Druid a land template, a fly template, and a water template. However, the templates were not very interesting and they didn't have any adjustable features to them. So a lot of people in the playtest just voted away the templates. But then that leaves us going back to using stat blocks. And now we're going to be very much dependent on which stat blocks are going to be in the player's handbook. Because as it's written now, the Moon Druid can only choose templates from the player's handbook. Now in the 2014 player's handbook, they had over 30 different stat blocks. So it's possible that the new player's handbook will have enough stat blocks to give the Moon Druid some solid choices, even solid choices at higher levels. But we're going to have to wait and see. So like the Ranger, the Druid is one that is not really solid, and we're hoping that they're going to get it right when the book actually comes out. Now, Paladin was one of the more controversial classes in the playtest. We saw a version of it in playtest 4, which definitely seemed overpowered, and then we saw that dialed back in playtest 6 to something more reasonable and more playable. The change that most bothered people was moving Divine Smite from a class feature to a spell. So now that Divine Smite is a spell, the Divine Smite feature is replaced with the Paladin Smite feature, and that includes a list of Paladin-specific spells, including Divine Smite, Thunderous Smite, Shining Smite, Blinding Smite, Staggering Smite, and Banishing Smite. And so, like I said, Divine Smite gets a nerf because it now requires a bonus action. And Banishing Smite was the only one of these that really didn't get an upgrade. But the other 4 definitely got a significant upgrade in their effectiveness. So Divine Smite becomes your option to just deal damage, and you can upcast it just like the old version. So while the other spells do less damage per level, they give you the option to inflict an effect or a condition on the target. This is solid game design, but I understand people who are disappointed in the change to Divine Smite. Overall, this will make it easier on dungeon masters who have to balance encounters for a paladin player. So while we're talking about bonus actions, let's talk about Lay on Hands, because it is no longer an action to use, it's a bonus action. So that's a serious improvement for Lay on Hands. So this means you can still attack and use Lay on Hands in the same turn. You just can't smite and use Lay on Hands in the same turn. And the next thing to highlight for Paladins is Weapon Mastery. So like the Fighter and the Barbarian, Paladins get Weapon Mastery. And this is an upgrade from the 2014 version and a trade-off from the Playtest 4 version where we saw Paladins with cantrips. I think Weapon Mastery definitely makes more sense than cantrips for Paladins. So another design efficiency is to make Divine Sense a Channel Divinity option. So this way you're not keeping track of your number of Divine Senses and your number of Channel Divinity. divinities, they're combined into one feature that you can now track. But like the 2014 version, you get a different channel divinity for each subclass that's thematic to that subclass. At 5th level, you get the Faithful Steed feature, which allows you to cast the Find Steed spell, and the Find Steed spell is now only an action to cast. So do you think we're going to start seeing paladins casting Find Steed during combat? Probably. So another thing to point out about the Paladin, Aura of Protection now has a limitation that you can only benefit from one Aura of Protection at a time. So you're no longer able to stack Aura Protections with 2 Paladins in the party. I think that was something that was already corrected in 2014 via Sage Advice, but I don't know that everyone was playing that way. Now it's very clear here described in the feature itself. At 9th level, the new Paladin gets the Abjure Foes feature, which is a significant upgrade considering the 2014 Paladin had no class feature at 9th level. So as a magic action, you can expend 1 use of your channel divinity. You can target a number of creatures equal to your charisma modifier that you can see within 60 feet of yourself. Each target must succeed on a wisdom saving throw or have the dazed and frightened condition for 1 minute. This is a pretty nasty ability, so that's a significant upgrade over the 2014 version. So the higher level Paladin features got some tweaks, but no significant changes, because the Paladin was already one of the more powerful classes in the game, so like the Rogue, that didn't need a whole lot of adjustments. So the biggest adjustments to the Paladin I've already covered. And let's take a look at the Paladin subclasses. Oath of the Ancients, Oath of Devotion, and Oath of Vengeance are all significantly improved over the 2014 version. Oath of Glory, which we originally saw in Mythic Odysseys of Theros, and then was reprinted in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, has some tweaks, but didn't have any sort of net gain. Some features got dialed up, some features got dialed back. Overall, I think it's pretty much a wash. The new Oath of Glory is just as powerful as the old Oath of Glory, and I think that'll make it pale just slightly in comparison to the other 3. But like almost everything in this new version of D&D, it's all going to be fairly well balanced, and I don't think we're going to have any glaringly bad options. So that wraps up our priest classes and leaves us with only 1 video left in our new D&D series. Next, we'll tackle the mages, wizard, warlock, and sorcerer, and we'll talk more about magic, spells, and the multiverse in the final video. So make sure you stay tuned, like and subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know when that next video lands, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again for visiting the Dire Den.